The wrought iron gates, taller than any Maria had ever seen, swung inward with a silent, almost predatory grace. Her small, worn suitcase felt heavier than usual in her hand as the hired car, a surprisingly comfortable sedan for someone in her position, glided up the winding drive. The mansion unfolded before her, a monstrous confection of marble and glass, sprawling across a manicured landscape that seemed to stretch to the horizon. It wasn't beautiful, not in the way her grandmother's cozy, cluttered home had been. It was imposing, an ostentatious display of wealth that felt less like a dwelling and more like a monument to cold, hard cash. She stepped out onto a gravel path that crunched under her cheap sneakers, the sound startlingly loud in the oppressive stillness. The air here was different too, thin, sterile, devoid of the familiar city smells of exhaust and street food. A uniformed driver, whose face she hadn't quite caught in her daze, had already vanished, leaving her utterly alone in the shadow of this behemoth. This was it, the job, the escape from overdue bills and the gnawing anxiety that had become her constant companion. A gilded cage, perhaps, but at least it had a roof. The front doors, immense and carved with intricate, meaningless patterns, opened before she could even raise a hand to knock. A woman stood framed in the cavernous entryway, her silhouette sharp against the cool, dim interior. Mrs. Park. Maria recognized her from the brief impersonal video call. The housekeeper was a formidable presence, her posture ramrod straight, her expression a mask of professional detachment. Her hair, pulled back in a severe bun, seemed to defy gravity, and her crisp, dark uniform gave her the air of a drill sergeant. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore zero, underscore, Mrs. Park stated, her voice devoid of warmth, a clipped accent giving her words an extra edge. Quote 1. Maria offered a tentative smile, her own voice feeling small in the vast space. Quote 2. Mrs. Park merely nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. Quote 3. The tour that followed was a blur of polished surfaces and echoing silence. Room after room, each more grand and untouched than the last. A ballroom with a crystal chandelier that dripped light like frozen tears. A library filled with books that looked utterly unread. A sprawling kitchen, gleaming with stainless steel, yet strangely devoid of the comforting aroma of cooking. Everything was perfect, immaculate, almost aggressively clean. It felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit, meticulously preserved and utterly uninhabited. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 4, underscore, Mrs. Park intoned, her voice a monotonous drone. Quote 5. Maria nodded, her head buzzing with the sheer scale of it all. It was a world away from the cramped apartment she'd just left, a world away from the familiar clatter of her old neighborhood. The air in the mansion was cool, almost chilling, and carried a faint, unidentifiable scent, like expensive cleaning products mixed with something metallic. It wasn't unpleasant, just alien. Her own room was small, sparse but clean, with a narrow bed and a small window overlooking a meticulously manicured rose garden. It was a relief to finally be alone, to let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She unpacked her few belongings, placing a framed photo of her grandmother on the bedside table, a small anchor in this vast, unsettling ocean. Later that afternoon, after a solitary, unappetizing meal in the staff dining room, a sterile space where the other maids and groundskeepers ate in silence, Maria was assigned to dust the main drawing room. The room was enormous, filled with antique furniture that gleamed under her cloth, reflecting the muted light from the tall windows. She worked methodically, her movements practiced and efficient, her mind drifting to her past, to the mistakes that had led her here. But this was a new start, a chance to rebuild. As she polished a dark, ornate wooden cabinet, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Across the vast expanse of the room, near a window overlooking a sculpted pond, a small figure stood, a boy. He was perhaps 5 or 6, dressed in an impossibly neat white shirt and dark trousers. He stood perfectly still, his back to her, gazing out at the pond. Around him, an array of brightly colored toys lay scattered on the plush carpet. A gleaming red fire truck, a remote control robot, a stack of vibrant building blocks. They looked pristine, untouched, like props in a photo shoot. Maria paused her dusting, watching him. There was an unnerving stillness about him, a quiet intensity that belied his age. He wasn't playing, he was simply observing. After a moment, as if sensing her gaze, he slowly turned his head. His eyes, when they met hers, were large and dark, holding a depth that seemed far too profound for a child. There was no curiosity in them, no childish wonder, only a profound, almost melancholic solitude. He didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't even blink. He just stared, a silent, unblinking assessment. Maria felt a sudden, inexplicable pang in her chest. A fierce, protective instinct flared within her, surprising in its intensity. This child, surrounded by so much, yet radiating such an emptiness, was a puzzle she suddenly felt an urgent need to solve. She offered him a small, gentle smile, a warmth she hoped would bridge the distance between them. Underscore, quote, underscore, six underscore, she murmured, her voice soft. The boy didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on her for another long moment, an eternity in the echoing silence of the room. Then, as abruptly as he had appeared, he turned his back to her again, his small frame once more facing the window. He didn't move, didn't shift, just resumed his silent vigil. Maria stood there, the dustcloth forgotten in her hand, her smile fading. The encounter had lasted mere seconds, but it had left an indelible mark. This house, with all its sterile grandeur, suddenly felt less like a prison and more like a tomb, and she had just glimpsed its most precious and perhaps most lonely inhabitant. She resumed her work, but her movements were slower now, more deliberate. The glint of polished surfaces seemed to mock her, and the silence, once merely oppressive, now felt heavy with unspoken sorrow. She had found her new gilded cage, but it seemed she wasn't the only one trapped within its opulent walls. A child's plea. The mansion's profound stillness was punctuated only by the distant thrum of hidden mechanisms and the soft swish of Maria's uniform as she traversed its expansive, gleaming corridors. Her duties were precise, bordering on the unsettling, polishing already immaculate surfaces, aligning perfectly symmetrical cushions, and cultivating an illusion of vitality in rooms that felt profoundly inanimate. Days blurred into an undifferentiated stream, marked solely by the sun's shifting angles through the colossal windows and Mrs. Park's unyielding severity. Yet Maria increasingly sensed a subtle presence, a fleeting shadow at the edge of her perception. One afternoon, while tidying the vast, unused playroom, Maria discovered Ethan perched on an ornate, miniature rocking horse. His small legs dangled, and a jumble of untouched toys lay scattered around him like forgotten relics. He wasn't engaged in play. He was simply present, his gaze unfocused, a familiar melancholy shadowing his features. The sight stirred a deep maternal chord within Maria, resonating with his evident solitude. "Rough day, little man?" she murmured, her voice a gentle ripple in the expansive quiet. Ethan flinched, startled, his wide, dark eyes slowly finding hers. He offered no words, but a slight nod sufficed. Maria reached into her apron pocket, producing a small, foil-wrapped granola bar she'd saved from her own meager lunch. "Here," she offered, extending her hand. "A secret weapon against the long afternoon." He hesitated, his eyes flicking from the bar to her face, a blend of suspicion and nascent wonder. No one had ever presented him with a secret weapon for anything. Slowly, with deliberate care, he reached out, his small finger brushing hers as he accepted the snack. The touch, brief and almost imperceptible, sent a surprising warmth through Maria. He unwrapped it meticulously, taking a small tentative bite, his gaze unwavering. "What's your favorite story?" Maria asked, settling onto the plush rug a respectful distance away, careful not to overwhelm him. She noticed a brightly illustrated book discarded near his feet, a tale of a valiant knight and a slumbering dragon. Ethan pointed a small finger at the book, still chewing slowly. "The knight," he mumbled, his voice a soft rasp from disuse. Maria picked up the book. "Mind if I read to you?" He shook his head, a subtle motion that was nevertheless a clear invitation. Maria opened the book, her voice a low, comforting murmur. weaving a tale of courage and adventure. She modulated her tone for the different characters, infusing the narrative with varied inflections and drama, her eyes occasionally flicking up to gauge Ethan's rapt attention. His chewing ceased, the granola bar forgotten in his small hand. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, utterly absorbed, a tiny spark of something akin to joy illuminating his usually somber eyes. As the story concluded, Maria gently closed the book, the silence now feeling lighter, softened by their shared moment. Ethan continued to gaze at her, a quiet intensity in his stare that conveyed volumes. He shuffled closer, just a few inches, a significant breach of his usual guardedness. Quote 13, he whispered, her name a fragile sound on his lips. Quote 14. The question, delivered with such heartbreaking earnestness, caught Maria utterly off guard. It wasn't a playful query, it was a raw, unvarnished plea from a child starved for connection. Her breath hitched. The mansion, the formidable Mrs. Park, her own precarious situation, all receded. All she saw was the small boy, his innocent face upturned, a universe of longing in his eyes. A pang of fierce, undeniable protectiveness surged through her. She understood in that instant the profound depth of his isolation, the vast emptiness this opulent prison represented for him. Her heart ached with a tenderness she hadn't felt since caring for her younger siblings. The word formed on her lips, not a jest, not a casual agreement, but a promise whispered from the heart. Yes, Ethan, she said, her voice a little thick with emotion. She reached out, gently ruffling his soft hair. I'll be your mom. A small hesitant smile, fragile as spun glass, bloomed on Ethan's face, transforming his features. It was a smile Maria realized she had never witnessed before, a glimpse of the joy that had been locked away. He leaned into her touch, a small, trusting gesture that solidified their unspoken pact. In that moment, amidst the mansion's cold grandeur, Maria found a warmth that promised to defy its pervasive chill, unaware of the treacherous currents into which her simple kindness had just drawn her. Shadows and whispers. Lavender and lemon balm now perfumed the east wing, a delicate counterpoint to the mansion's pervasive mustiness. Maria hummed a half-remembered lullaby, tidying Ethan's room, a space utterly transformed from the neglected sepulchre it had been just a week prior. Salvaged toys, well-worn books, and a colorful collage of drawings now tacked to the wall. Each element marked a small triumph against the oppressive quiet. Maria, my turn. Ethan's voice, no longer a hesitant murmur but a bright peal, echoed from the playroom. A warmth, surprisingly intense, blossomed in Maria's chest as she smiled. She found him perched on a low stool, eyes aglow with concentration, ready to cast the dice for their makeshift board game. It was a humble affair, scribbled on discarded paper, yet to Ethan, it was an epic journey. Careful, mighty explorer, she teased, observing his small hand tremble before releasing the colorful cubes. The dragon's lair awaits. His giggle, a sound that brought an unexpected levity to the mansion's weighty air, filled the room. I got a 6. I win, he cheered, springing up for a clumsy victory dance. Maria applauded, a genuine, unburdened laugh escaping her, foreign yet exhilarating in the vast, echoing space. In these moments, the mansion's shadows receded, bathed in the vibrant glow of childish delight. A profound sense of purpose, a fierce protectiveness bloomed within her, startling even herself. This was no longer merely employment, it was a calling. Later that afternoon, as Ethan quietly read in the sunlit conservatory under Maria's watchful eye, a prickle traced the back of her neck. Her gaze lifted, drawn to the grand archway leading to the main hall. Mr. Kim stood there, a static silhouette against the ornate backdrop. His dark suit seemed to drink the light, his face an immutable mask. He neither moved nor spoke, simply observed them. A shiver, not of fear, but of an unsettling awareness, ran through Maria. It was the sensation of being watched by a predator, albeit an unnervingly still and silent one. He remained for a long moment, his presence a palpable weight, before silently melting back into the mansion's depths. The incident left Maria with a persistent unease that clung to her throughout the week. The mansion, once merely lonely, now felt imbued with a constant vigilance. She found herself subconsciously glancing over her shoulder more often, her senses heightened to the subtle groans and creaks of the old house. The handful of quiet, efficient servants remained polite but distant, their eyes evading hers if she attempted to engage them beyond professional pleasantries. One evening, while preparing a light dinner for Ethan in the cavernous kitchen, Maria heard it. A swift, urgent murmur of voices from the study down the hall. The Korean words, sharp and clipped, rose and fell with an intensity that pierced the usual quiet. This was not Mr. Kim's measured tones. It was raw, impassioned, bordering on argument. She strained to discern a word, a inflection, anything to provide context, but the unfamiliar sounds remained a wall of unintelligible worry. Then a sudden sharp rap on the kitchen door made her jump. It was one of the younger housekeepers, her face pallid. "Maria, Mr. Kim requests you take Ethan to the north wing for the evening. Do not return to this area until morning." Her voice was barely a whisper, her eyes wide with an emotion Maria couldn't quite decipher, perhaps fear or grave concern. Maria nodded, her heart thudding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She led Ethan away, his small hand clasped tightly in hers. As they traversed a seldom used corridor, the chill in the air deepened. She passed a window overlooking the sprawling manicured grounds and froze. Silhouetted against the fading twilight near the perimeter fence were several figures. Not gardeners or estate workers. Their posture was rigid, watchful, and unmistakable in the dim light. Armed guards, their weapons glinting faintly. They moved with a silent, methodical precision that bespoke training and purpose. The sight sent a cold dread through her, a stark realization that the mansion's walls held more than just shadows and whispers. They held secrets and perhaps danger she was only just beginning to grasp. The innocent laughter from the playroom now seemed a world away. The warning. The crisp autumn air, usually a welcome invigorator, now carried a subtle chill that seemed to seep into the very walls of the mansion. Inside, however, a pocket of warmth persisted, centered around Ethan and Maria. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm, a gentle dance of learning and laughter. Maria had introduced Ethan to the joy of building fantastical castles from blankets and pillows in his room, transforming the once stark space into a vibrant landscape of imagination. One blustery afternoon, as the wind rattled the tall windows, Maria was helping Ethan construct a particularly ambitious fortress, complete with a moat made of blue construction paper. Ethan, his small face flushed with excitement, paused, a block clutched in his hand. "Mom, can we put a flag on top?" he asked, his voice bright and clear, entirely unself-conscious. Maria's breath caught. The word, so casually uttered, resonated deep within her. It wasn't the first time he'd used it, but previously it had been a whispered secret between them, a soft endearment exchanged when no one else was around. Now it echoed in the cavernous hallway just as Mrs. Park glided past, her footsteps unusually audible against the polished marble. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Mrs. Park paused at the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim light of the hall. Her gaze, usually cool and appraising, sharpened into a pinpoint of ice as it landed on Maria. There was no overt reaction, no spoken word, yet the message was unmistakable, a stark, chilling disapproval that made Maria's skin prickle. A moment later, Mrs. Park continued down the hall, her presence leaving behind a lingering scent of expensive, bitter perfume and a palpable tension. Maria forced a smile for Ethan, though a tremor ran through her. "Of course, sweet pea," she managed, her voice a little unsteady. "A very grand flag for our very grand castle." But the ease of their afternoon had been shattered. The innocent word, Ethan's genuine affection, had inadvertently drawn a line in the sand, a boundary she hadn't realized she was crossing. Later that evening, after Ethan was tucked in, his dreams no doubt filled with valiant knights and towering fortresses, Maria returned to her own room. The small space, usually a sanctuary of quiet reflection, felt different tonight, a subtle shift in the air, a faint, almost imperceptible displacement of the familiar. She lit the bedside lamp. its warm glow doing little to dispel the growing unease. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for the source of her disquiet. Nothing seemed amiss. Her neatly folded clothes sat on the dresser. Her worn copy of Jane Eyre rested on the nightstand. Then, nestled beneath the pillow, a stark white envelope lay waiting. It hadn't been there when she'd left for dinner. Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. There was no name on the front, no address, just a blank, unsettling plainness. With a swallow, she tore it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper, thick and expensive, bore a message printed in stark block letters. The words were not handwritten, suggesting a deliberate effort to conceal the sender's identity. Know your place. He is not yours. Consider this your only warning. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The lamp's glow, once comforting, now cast long dancing shadows that twisted into menacing shapes. The elegant script, devoid of any personal touch, was colder than any scream. It felt like a direct punch to the gut, stealing her breath. Maria reread the note, her mind struggling to process the implications. He is not yours. The words echoed Mrs. Park's icy stare, cementing the connection. This wasn't just a random act, it was deliberate, calculated, and aimed squarely at the burgeoning affection she felt for Ethan. A cold dread seeped into her bones, replacing the warmth she'd cultivated with Ethan. This was more than just a stern word from her employer. This was a threat, a chilling reminder that her position here, however comfortable it had become, was precarious. The innocence of Ethan's mom now felt like a dangerous spark in a powder keg. She crumpled the note in her trembling hand, the crisp paper making a sharp, accusing sound. The security guards, Mr. Kim's unsettling surveillance, it all coalesced into a terrifying mosaic. This house, this gilded cage, held secrets far darker than she had imagined, and her growing bond with Ethan had inadvertently pulled her into their dangerous orbit. Fear, cold and sharp, began to gnaw at her. Fear for her job, yes, but more profoundly, fear for her safety and for the fragile, precious connection she had forged with a lonely little boy. The quiet strength she usually possessed felt suddenly brittle, exposed to an unseen, ominous force. The warmth of the mansion now felt like a stifling heat, pressing in on her, reminding her that she was an outsider, and a warned one at that. A cold confrontation. The summons came via soft knock on her bedroom door, not from Mrs. Park, but from a younger maid Maria hadn't seen before. "Mr. Kim requests your presence in his study, Maria." The maid's eyes, wide and unnervingly deferential, lingered on Maria's face for a moment too long before she scurried away. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs. The note, still crumpled beneath a stack of clean clothes in her drawer, felt like a burning coal in her pocket. It was happening. The inevitable reckoning. She smoothed down her uniform, taking a deep, shuddering breath before stepping out into the opulent hallway. The polished marble gleamed under the recessed lighting, reflecting her anxious silhouette like a distorted mirror. Each step toward the study felt heavy, pulling her deeper into an unknown current. The study door was a dark, imposing slab of carved wood. Maria hesitated, then knocked softly. A deep, resonant voice, completely devoid of warmth, bid her enter. Mr. Kim sat behind a massive mahogany desk, a single lamp casting a warm glow on a stack of neatly arranged papers. The rest of the room was cloaked in shadows, making his figure seem even more formidable. He didn't look up immediately, his fingers steepled under his chin, his gaze fixed on a point just beyond the edge of his desk. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the distant hum of the mansion's unseen machinery. Finally, he raised his head, his dark eyes like chips of obsidian. "Maria," he said, his voice a low thrum that vibrated in the air. Not quite a question, not quite a statement. He gestured to the plush leather armchair opposite him. "Please sit." She moved like a marionette, her limbs stiff, and sank into the chair. The leather was cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the heat blooming in her cheeks. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. "I understand Ethan has taken a particular liking to you," Mr. Kim began, his tone even, almost clinical. There was no inflection, no hint of emotion, which made his words all the more unsettling. He refers to you as Mom. Maria's breath caught. She had anticipated this. Yet hearing it spoken aloud by him in this chillingly detached manner still sent a jolt of panic through her. She tried to swallow, but her throat felt suddenly dry. Sir, with all due respect, it was a joke. A silly thing children sometimes do. She tried to force a light, dismissive laugh, but it emerged as a strangled squeak. He's a very sweet boy, and sometimes he gets carried away. Mr. Kim's gaze was unblinking, unwavering. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing just perceptibly. A joke? His voice remained calm, but Maria felt a prickle of ice down her spine. Do you find his affections humorous, Maria? The question hung in the air, a loaded accusation. Maria's carefully constructed facade of nonchalance crumbled. She felt exposed, vulnerable under his intense scrutiny. No, sir, of course not. I adore Ethan. He's a wonderful child, but I would never presume. She trailed off, searching for the right words, for any words that might appease the silent, formidable man across from her. It's just children, they don't always understand. He's so young. A muscle twitched in Mr. Kim's jaw, the only outward sign of any internal shift. He picked up a silver letter opener, turning it over and over in his fingers, the polished metal glinting in the lamplight. Ethan is a sensitive boy, he stated, his voice still flat, but with an underlying edge Maria had not heard before. He attaches easily, and he is easily influenced. His eyes, dark and fathomless, bored into hers. I expect the staff to maintain appropriate boundaries with my son. He requires structure, not flights of fancy. Maria felt a cold dread seep into her bones. The subtle threat was unmistakable. He wasn't just questioning her, he was asserting his absolute control, his ownership. The casual reference to my son was a verbal stake, claiming Ethan, drawing an invisible but impenetrable line around him. I understand, sir, Maria said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze any longer. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. She realized then that the note, the silent warning, had merely been a prelude. This was the true confrontation, and the power dynamic was devastatingly clear. She was an employee, replaceable, insignificant, standing against a force that commanded not just the mansion, but seemingly the very air she breathed. When she finally dared to look up, Mr. Kim was still watching her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched again, taut with unspoken implications. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a chilling affirmation of her place, and a stark warning of the consequences should she ever forget it again. She felt a genuine tremor of fear, a primal instinct for self-preservation that had been dormant since her arrival. This was not just about a child's innocent word. This was about power, control, and a dangerous game she had inadvertently stumbled into. Mother's touch. The oppressive silence of the mansion was abruptly shattered before dawn. A piercing, childlike shriek echoed through the halls, followed by a frantic flurry of footsteps. Maria, already awake and wrestling with the ghost of Mr. Kim's warning, shot out of bed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a primal fear twisting in her gut. She didn't need to be told, she knew. She found Ethan's room in chaos. The boy thrashed in his bed, his small body wrecked with tremors. His face was flushed a dangerous crimson, his lips cracked and dry. His eyes, usually bright and inquisitive, were glazed over, unfocused. Mrs. Hahn hovered uselessly at the foot of the bed, wringing her hands, while a young maid stood frozen by the door, wide-eyed with terror. The air in the room was thick with the scent of sickness, a cloying sweetness that made Maria's stomach churn. Maria pushed past the frozen staff, her movements decisive. Quote 18, she demanded, her voice cutting through the panic. Mrs. Hahn stammered, her voice trembling. Maria didn't wait for further explanation. She pressed the back of her hand against Ethan's forehead. The heat radiating from him was alarming, like touching a hot stove. His skin felt dry and rough, a stark contrast to the soft, smooth skin she'd grown accustomed to. A wave of nausea washed over her, but she pushed it down. She remembered nights like this from her own childhood, her mother's cool hand on her brow. Quote 21. Maria ordered, her voice firm, overriding Mrs. Hand's dazed inaction. Quote 22. The young maid, spurred by Maria's authority, scurried out of the room. Mrs. Hahn, though still flustered, began to move, fetching the items Maria requested. As the staff moved with a newfound urgency, Maria sat on the edge of Ethan's bed, gently stroking his forehead. He whimpered, a soft, pained sound that tore at her heart. When the cool water and towels arrived, Maria immediately began to sponge Ethan down. The other staff kept a respectful, almost fearful distance. They were used to a world of sterile solutions and professional medical care, not the raw, messy reality of a sick child being tended with simple cloths and cool water. Maria worked with a practiced efficiency, born of necessity and a deep well of maternal instinct. She dampened a small cloth and placed it on his burning forehead, then another on his chest. She murmured soft reassurances, words her own mother had whispered to her, forgotten until this moment. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, her voice a soothing balm in the tense room. "Mommy's here. You'll be all right." Ethan stirred, his eyelids fluttering. His gaze, still unfocused, seemed to find hers for a fleeting moment. A tiny, almost imperceptible sigh escaped his lips. For the first time since she entered the room, the tension in his small body seemed to lessen. Hours blurred into a relentless cycle of sponging, comforting, and re-wetting cloths. Maria barely registered the passage of time, her focus solely on Ethan. She tried to get him to drink small sips of water, but he often pushed it away. The thermometer, when she finally managed to get an accurate reading, confirmed her fears. 104 degrees Fahrenheit, a dangerous number. She made a concoction of ginger and honey, a remedy her grandmother swore by for fevers, brewing it in the kitchen despite the cook's skeptical glances. She forced spoonfuls of the warm, sweet liquid past Ethan's chapped lips, praying it would help. As the morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, Mr. Kim appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment, a silent, imposing figure. Maria felt his presence before she saw him, a cold prickle on the back of her neck. She didn't look up, unwilling to break her connection with Ethan. She continued to dab his forehead, her movements gentle and rhythmic. She could feel his eyes on her, a heavy, unreadable weight. The air in the room thickened, charged with an unspoken tension. Ethan, sensing the shift, whimpered again, instinctively burrowing closer to Maria. She wrapped an arm around him, pulling him gently against her side, a silent shield. Maria finally glanced up, meeting Mr. Kim's gaze. His face was a mask, as always, but for a fleeting second she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. A momentary tremor of concern, perhaps, or even a grudging admiration. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual impenetrable coldness. He said nothing, simply turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Maria let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The encounter had been brief, yet it had left her shaken. She returned her attention to Ethan, stroking his hair. His breathing was still shallow, but the frantic thrashing had subsided. His skin, though still hot, felt marginally less fiery. The ginger and honey, perhaps, or simply the relentless cool compresses. Or maybe, she thought, it was the simple, undeniable comfort of a mother's touch. Regardless, a faint sense of hope, fragile yet persistent, began to bloom in her chest. She wouldn't leave his side, not until the fever broke, unveiling the truth. The oppressive heat of the previous days had broken, replaced by a cool, insistent drizzle that tapped against the mansion's numerous windows. Maria, feeling a hollow ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the weather, moved through the hushed corridors, a damp cloth still clutched in her hand. Ethan's fever had finally retreated, leaving him pale and exhausted but blessedly asleep. Her vigil had ended, but a new, more insidious unease had taken root. She'd gone to tidy the study, a room she rarely entered, driven by a restless energy. Mr. Kim had been working late, papers strewn across his expansive mahogany desk. As Maria gathered a stack of heavy binders, one slid, knocking a decorative inkwell askew. Beneath it, nestled in a hidden compartment she hadn't known existed, lay something cold and hard, a gun. Not a hunting rifle, but a sleek black handgun, its surface glinting dully in the low light. Her breath hitched. She stared at it, a primal fear seizing her. This wasn't a prop from a movie. This was real, deadly. Her gaze snagged on a crumpled piece of newsprint tucked beside the weapon. With trembling fingers, she retrieved it, unfolding the yellowed paper. The headline screamed in bold Korean characters, but a grainy photograph beneath it needed no translation. Mr. Kim's unmistakable profile, younger, harder, was captured in a police lineup. The accompanying text, though indecipherable, was bracketed by words she recognized from snippets of overheard conversations. Quote 25, quote 26, quote 27. The date was years ago, but the implication was stark, undeniable. This wasn't just a wealthy, reclusive businessman. This was a man with a past etched in violence, a man who kept a gun hidden in his desk, a man connected to the shadowy underbelly of society. The paper slipped from her nerveless fingers. Her blood ran cold. Ethan, her Ethan, the innocent boy who had clung to her, sought comfort in her embrace, was living in a gilded cage built by a criminal. Her debt, her desperation, had led her here into the heart of something truly dangerous. The unspoken threat that had always lingered in the periphery of her mind now materialized, solid and terrifying. Later that morning, Maria found Ethan in the sunroom, tracing patterns on the fogged glass with a small finger. He looked fragile, still recovering, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. He reached for her, a silent invitation for a hug, but Maria hesitated. A chasm had opened between them in her mind, a chasm filled with the image of that gun, that newspaper clipping. She was a mother, yes, but she was also a woman caught in a trap. Her maternal instincts warred with a desperate need for self-preservation, for distance. "Hey, little man," she said, her voice sounding unnaturally bright, hollow. She kept a small space between them, busying herself with straightening a cushion. "Feeling better?" Ethan's smile faltered. He watched her, a subtle shift in his bright gaze. He was keenly attuned to her moods, a sensitive barometer of her emotions. He tilted his head, his small brow furrowed. "Maria," he whispered, the single word a question, a plea. She forced a wider smile, though it felt brittle. "Just tidying up, sweetheart." She moved to the far end of the room, adjusting a pot of orchids. The vibrant colors seemed to mock her internal turmoil. She could feel his eyes on her, feel the weight of his unspoken confusion. The sunroom, usually a sanctuary of light and warmth, now felt suffocating. Every rustle of the leaves outside, every creak of the old house, sounded like a warning. She had to pull back, for her own safety, for his. She couldn't let herself become so deeply entangled that escape became impossible. She needed to make herself less essential, less visible. Ethan, however, was not so easily deterred. He rose from the window seat, a small, determined figure. He padded across the oriental rug, his little slipper making no sound. He stopped directly in front of her, his hand reaching out tentatively, tugging at the hem of her apron. "Maria, are you mad?" His voice was small, vulnerable. The accusation, however innocent, twisted her heart. She knelt, her resolve crumbling around the edges. She couldn't meet his eyes, couldn't risk revealing the terror she felt. "No, Ethan, of course not." She forced herself to touch his hair, a fleeting, almost clinical gesture. "Maria's just busy." He didn't release her apron. Instead, he leaned into her, pressing his forehead against her stomach. A familiar gesture of comfort he'd developed. He began to hum a tuneless little melody, something she'd sung to him during his fever. The warmth of his small body against hers. The simple, trusting act was a physical ache. He was seeking solace and she was denying it. A profound sadness washed over her, mixed with a renewed wave of fear. How could she push him away? How could she protect him, or herself, when he clung to her like a lifeline? He didn't understand the shadows that lurked beneath the polished surface of his home, the danger that hummed silently around them. And she, Maria, was now inextricably bound to it all, a silent witness, a reluctant participant. The weight of the gun, the chilling headline, felt like a chain around her heart, pulling her deeper into the chilling truth of Mr. Kim's world. The threat and the plea. The persistent ring of Mr. Kim's burner phone cut through the mansion's oppressive silence, a jarring intrusion that made Maria flinch. It wasn't a usual ringtone, but a tinny, almost mocking jingle she hadn't heard before. Mr. Kim, seated in his study across from Maria, his usual impassive mask firmly in place, merely raised an eyebrow at the device vibrating on the polished mahogany desk. He picked it up with a slow, deliberate motion, answering without a word. Maria watched him, every muscle tensed. Since the discovery of the handgun and the newspaper clipping, a palpable icy distance had settled between them. She cleaned, she cooked, she cared for Ethan with an intensity that bordered on fierce, but her interactions with Mr. Kim were stiff, formal, devoid of the cautious trust that had begun to blossom. She saw the lines of his face, etched deeper now, the way his jaw tightened imperceptibly as he listened. A cold dread began to coil in her stomach. "I understand," Mr. Kim finally said, his voice a low rumble that barely carried across the room. There was no inflection, no discernible emotion, yet the air thickened, growing heavy with unspoken menace. He paused, listening again, and Maria noticed the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as he brought the phone closer to his ear. Then he spoke one word, a single, sharp exhale that seemed to rip through the silence. "Ethan." Maria's breath hitched. The word, a beloved name uttered in such a chilling context, struck her like a physical blow. Her maternal instinct, already thrumming beneath her skin, surged to the forefront, sharp and protective. She pushed back from the table, a chair scraping loudly against the floor. Mr. Kim, his eyes still fixed on some unseen point beyond the study window, slowly ended the call. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the manicured gardens, now shrouded in the soft twilight. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the room, making his silhouette seem larger, more menacing. He wasn't looking at the roses or the neatly trimmed hedges. His gaze was fixed on something far away, something only he could see. "They know about him," Mr. Kim stated, his voice devoid of his usual controlled cadence, a raw edge to his tone Maria had never heard. He didn't turn, but the tension radiating from him was a tangible force. "They mentioned his school, the red scarf he wears." Maria felt a cold wave wash over her. Ethan's red scarf, a gift from her, worn almost every day. It was a detail only someone who had observed him closely would know. Her mind raced, picturing Ethan's small figure, alone, vulnerable. A silent scream ripped through her, trapped in her throat. Mr. Kim finally turned, his face a mask of something akin to torment. His eyes, usually unreadable depths, were haunted, flickering with a desperate fear that was profoundly unsettling. For the first time, Maria saw not the formidable crime boss, but a father grappling with an unimaginable threat to his child. The veneer of his carefully constructed composure had shattered, revealing the raw, bleeding humanity beneath. He walked toward her, not with his usual measured stride, but with a hesitant, almost stumbling gait. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on her, pleading. It was a look Maria had never expected to see directed at her from him. His shoulders, usually so straight and unyielding, seemed to slump under an invisible weight. "Maria," he began, his voice hoarse, a stark contrast to his usual calm baritone. He swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the floor for a moment before meeting hers again. "They will use him to get to me." The confession hung in the air, a chilling confirmation of Maria's worst fears. She said nothing, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach, but her gaze remained steady, waiting. I, I need you to protect him," Mr. Kim finally managed, the words a desperate whisper, wrung from him with immense effort. It was a plea, naked and unadorned, from a man who never pleaded. His pride, his power, his carefully cultivated image of invincibility, all crumbled in that single raw request. His eyes, now brimming with a vulnerability that pierced Maria's heart, searched hers for an answer. "He trusts you. More than he trusts me, I think." Maria looked at him, at the broken man standing before her, stripped bare of his defenses. The conflict within her raged. The man who had imprisoned her, who had lied about his identity, was now asking her to risk everything for his son. Yet in his eyes, she saw the genuine, agonizing fear of a father, and it resonated with her own fierce love for Ethan. Her hand instinctively went to her chest, over her racing heart. She knew, with a certainty that transcended her own fear, that she would do anything for Ethan. The question was, could she do it for Mr. Kim? A mother's courage. A gunshot tore a jagged rip in the mansion's enforced quiet, a sound so alien it struck Maria like a physical blow. It was quickly joined by another, then a barrage, each detonation reverberating off polished marble and paneled walls, a brutal percussion of panic. Mr. Kim's desperate plea still echoed in Maria's mind, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She didn't hesitate. Ethan's trusting face, his bright red scarf, flashed before her. Quote 35, she shrieked, her voice raw, slicing through the sudden bedlam erupting from below. Footsteps thundered, shouts rose, an indistinguishable tangle of fear and command. Maria moved, propelled by a primal instinct, bursting from her room and racing toward Ethan's door. The air vibrated with terrifying energy, the grand house now a battleground. She found Ethan huddled by his bed, a small trembling figure in his pajamas, eyes wide with terror, reflecting the erratic pulse of lights from outside. The downstairs crash of glass was deafening, punctuated by more gunfire. Maria didn't speak. She simply scooped him up, a surprising surge of strength flooding her limbs. His small body felt fragile, yet he clung to her with the desperation of a child caught in a nightmare. Quote 36, she whispered, a fierce, shaky lullaby against his ear. She pulled him close, her body a shield, arms wrapped around him as if to absorb every shock wave. Her gaze swept the opulent room, seeking escape. Windows too high, the hallway too exposed. A deep, guttural roar from below signaled a direct confrontation. Maria pressed Ethan's head into her shoulder, obscuring the unfolding horror. She knew with chilling certainty that true safety lay not just in concealment, but in distance. Her eyes landed on the heavy carved wardrobe, an ancient darkwood behemoth built into the wall. It wouldn't offer full protection, but it was a temporary refuge, a place to gather her wits. With Ethan still clutched to her, she wrestled open the wardrobe door. The hinges groaned in protest, a small sound lost in the growing pandemonium. She pushed him inside first, then squeezed in after him, pulling the door shut with a soft click. Darkness enveloped them, thick and immediate, smelling faintly of cedar and forgotten fabrics. Ethan whimpered, burying his face deeper into her. Maria held him tighter, her own breath ragged. The assault intensified. Heavy boots pounded on the stairs, shouts in a language she didn't understand. Then the terrifying thwack of something striking the wall outside their wardrobe, followed by another gunshot that seemed to detonate just beyond their makeshift sanctuary. Maria flinched, instinctively turning her body, attempting to create an even greater barrier for Ethan. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Fear, cold and sharp, clawed at her, but it was instantly eclipsed by a scorching protectiveness. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about Ethan. A crash from the room indicated something heavy overturning. Maria heard muffled voices, closer now, just outside their hiding place. She pressed a hand gently over Ethan's mouth, a silent plea for stillness, for quiet. He trembled violently but understood, his small body a tableau of frozen terror. Then the door to Ethan's room burst open with a splintering crack, a new wave of shouting, closer, more immediate. Maria recognized Mr. Kim's voice, harsh and commanding, followed by a series of rapid-fire retorts, then more gunshots, closer still. The air outside the wardrobe seemed to crackle with violence. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could make them both vanish. Through a sliver of the wardrobe door, a faint light appeared, then shifting shadows. She heard heavy breathing, the scuff of shoes on the floorboards. Someone was in the room. Her heart leaped into her throat. An intruder? Or Mr. Kim? Mr. Suddenly, the wardrobe door was flung open. Maria gasped, bracing for the worst. Standing in the doorway, framed by the chaos beyond, was Mr. Kim. His suit disheveled, a streak of blood marring his cheek, his usually controlled eyes blazing with desperate primal intensity. He held a heavy pistol, still smoking. But his gaze wasn't on the weapon. It was fixed on Maria, on Ethan, on the way she held the boy so fiercely. In that moment, amidst the lingering echoes of battle, Mr. Kim saw it. Not a hired hand, not a woman burdened by debt, but a mother. He saw the raw, unadulterated love in Maria's eyes, her body instinctively shielding his son, her readiness to sacrifice everything. A flicker of something profound, akin to awe, crossed his face, displacing his earlier desperation. He saw his son's trust, not in him, the father, but in her, the woman who had become his mother in all but name. Maria, he choked out, his voice hoarse, the name a testament to a newfound understanding. Come, it's not safe here. We need to go. Maria nodded, her eyes still wide with adrenaline, but a fresh determination hardening her features. She emerged from the wardrobe, Ethan still clutched to her, his small face buried in her neck. She looked at Mr. Kim, not with fear or resentment, but with a fierce, unwavering resolve. She was no longer just Maria Jenkins, the woman seeking refuge. She was Maria, Ethan's mother, and she would protect him, no matter the cost. An unconventional family. The silence that descended after the last siren faded was not one of peace, but of a lingering tremor. Maria, still clutching Ethan in the cramped wardrobe, could feel the rapid thump of his small heart against her chest. Her own breath hitched, a raw ache in her throat. When Mr. Kim finally opened the door, a sliver of dawn light sliced through the dust-filled air, illuminating the chaos. Furniture was overturned, porcelain shards glittered like malevolent stars, and the scent of gunpowder still clung heavy, metallic, and acrid. Mr. Kim's face was a mask of exhaustion, streaked with grime, and a fresh cut above his brow that oozed a thin line of crimson. His expensive suit was torn, disheveled, a stark contrast to his usual impeccable appearance. He looked at Maria. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, now held a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He extended a hand, calloused fingers shaking slightly. "Maria," he rasped, his voice rougher than usual. Are you both unharmed?" She nodded, unable to speak, her grip on Ethan tightening instinctively. He reached for Ethan, pulling the boy into a fierce, almost desperate embrace. Ethan, still trembling, buried his face in his father's shoulder, silent tears wetting the dark fabric. Maria watched them, a strange warmth unfurling in her chest, a feeling utterly alien yet profoundly comforting. This man, ruthless and dangerous, was still a father, and this boy, isolated and burdened, was still a child seeking solace. When Mr. Kim finally released Ethan, he turned back to Maria. He didn't offer a platitude or a dismissive nod. Instead, his gaze was direct, unwavering. "What you did," he began, his voice low, "it was reckless, but it was also brave. You protected him, my son." He paused, searching for words, an unusual struggle for a man of such decisive authority. "I owe you more than I can express." Maria finally found her voice, a whisper. "He's just a boy, Mr. Kim. He needed me." A flicker of something akin to admiration crossed his features. "Indeed. And you answered? You did not abandon him, even when your own life was in danger." He took a deep breath, the air whistling slightly through his nostrils. "I misjudged you, Maria. I saw only a debt-ridden woman, a temporary solution. I see now, you are more." His eyes met hers, holding a profound gravity. "You are indispensable, to Ethan, to us." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Us. It was the first time she had been included in that intimate pronoun, a world unto itself. The choice was clear, stark. Flee this dangerous life, disappear and rebuild, or stay and embrace the terrifying reality of what us truly meant. The image of Ethan's small hand clutching hers, his tear-streaked face hidden in her embrace, flashed through her mind. He needed her, and she realized with a surprising jolt, she needed him too. Needed the purpose he unknowingly gave her, the anchor in a sea of her own uncertainty. "I'll stay," Maria said, the words firm, resolute. A quiet power bloomed within her. The risk was immense, the future uncertain, but the alternative, leaving Ethan, felt like a betrayal of something precious and newly found. Mr. Kim simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her decision, a silent acceptance of her as more than an employee. He turned, gesturing towards the damaged living room. We have much to do, but first, we rest. Months unfurled, painting the mansion with a new, if fragile kind of life. The repairs were swift, efficient, but the scars of the invasion lingered in the subtle tension that hummed beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the world outside their gilded cage. Maria, however, had found her rhythm. She moved through the grand halls not as a servant, but as a guardian, a silent anchor. The security was tighter, the surveillance more pervasive, but within those confines, a semblance of normalcy began to grow, nurtured by Maria's quiet determination. One crisp autumn evening, a rare quiet descended upon the estate. The scent of roasting chicken wafted from the kitchen, mingled with the earthy fragrance of fallen leaves carried on a gentle breeze through an open window. Maria was in the study, a surprisingly domestic scene unfolding. Ethan, his small face scrunched in concentration, was meticulously drawing fantastical creatures in a large sketchpad. Maria, seated beside him, patiently helped him spell out the names of his creations: a griffin, a dragon, and unicorn. Her fingers, scarred from countless hours of work in her past life, gently guided his. The door opened, and Mr. Kim entered, shedding his jacket with a weary sigh. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The warm lamplight cast a soft glow on Maria's kind face, on Ethan's focused brow. The usual sternness in his expression softened, replaced by a subtle easing of his features. He didn't speak, merely watched for a moment, an almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Ethan looked up, his eyes brightening. Appa, look, this is a phoenix. He held up a drawing of a magnificent bird rising from flames. Mr. Kim walked over, his heavy footsteps muffled by the thick rug. He leaned down, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. A phoenix, my son. Very good. His gaze flickered to Maria, a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding passing between them. Maria met his eyes, a faint smile touching her lips. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of shared experience and a future still unknown. The world outside remained dangerous, unpredictable, but within these walls, for this fleeting moment, they were an unconventional family, forged not by blood, but by fire, by fear, and by a quiet, fierce protectiveness that had bound them irrevocably together. They were a fragile unit, a strange constellation in a dark sky, but they were undeniably us.